His face brightened. He seemed pleased at my perspicacity. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But it's avoiding the real question, I continued, which is one of right. Ah, he remarked, with a wry pucker in his mouth. I see you still believe in such things as right and wrong. But don't you at all? I demanded. Not in the least bit. Might is right, and that is all there is to it. Weakness is wrong, which is a very poor way of saying that it is good for oneself to be strong and evil for oneself to be weak. Or better yet, it is pleasurable to be strong because of the profits and painful to be weak because of the penalties. Just now, the possession of this money is a pleasurable thing. It is good for one to possess it, being able to possess it. I wrong myself and the life that is in me if I give it to you and forego the pleasure of possessing it. That is another quote from the book The Sea Wolf by Jack London. Again, one of those novels that I have found rather inspirational and intriguing, especially as a gateway between raw, rigorous philosophy and something that's a little bit more easy on the reading. Trust me when I say this. I don't find myself capable of reading all of the hard stuff all of the time. So, but again, if you're looking for a novel, something worth reading, I would highly recommend The Sea Wolf by Jack London. But we're not here to talk about the fishes. Today we are returning for part 2 with Chuck Robeson. And would you introduce yourself once more?
What's up, everybody? My name's Chuck. I am one of the owners of Raid Skateboards and All Skill No Luck here in Southern California. Some people would say behind enemy lines. I disagree. It's still home kind of thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but you get the idea.
Yeah, no, I do. I think we all know why we say behind enemy lines
Yeah,
because California has for a long time been the poster boy of tyrannical overreach. But now they're no longer unique in that. I think a number of other states are deciding to join the cohort of the evil empire, and that's just the way of it. So,
it is. And it's almost like it's a competition now. Like there's places that are far worse than California is now.
which is such a as a cultural reference, I think that can change. I think we could see some difference in here.
I
Um,
agree.
particularly in the sense of like I'm not a cultural nihilist, just to be very clear. Neither am I a cultural cynic. Like I don't think everything's gonna just I don't think it is a guaranteed outcome for the future that everything will just go to ruin.
I
uh
agree.
in many ways that's my nightmare, and I mean nightmare in the very realist sense
Hmm.
of I go to sleep and that is what I dream about in a nightmarish sense. But it is also at the same time the should be the fuel to the fire to say don't throw up your hands and quit. In fact, and rather find courage, steal courage, and go do what is right. Recently it's come to pass this idea that part of that quote even coming out of the sea wolf is this idea of sort of a moral a not an anti-moralistic position, or sort of a moral nihilism, or even like a might makes right argument where well, we will always be willing to forego our morals for some form of victory. And you see this even in films where like you have the character who's like this moral character, and it's also represented in that book by Jack London, where the supposed moral character has to sort of mature, but in some ways that maturing looks like either fulfilling or abandoning his morals.
Hmm.
And why I recommend the Sea Wolf is because the main character seems to actually, in the beginning, hold morals that he cannot fulfill, and by the end of the book, he has to become something more than just your
No.
browser. I think it'll hold. You can still hear me. Well, it'll probably pop back up in a second. But the main character has to become something of substance, so that his ideals and his morals are not just some sort of simplistic um, perspective. I guess it's not even simplistic. He has to essentially learn and find a way to fulfill his morals as opposed to just sit on them. And so there you go. I'm back. Um, So I think that's a really good place for us to start off. Before we get any further in, I am going to remind everybody we're doing a pre-order on our inverted and subdued shirts. Entry Pre-ordering a shirt gets you entered into a giveaway of a tour knife. Tour is willing to give us a mullet. Well, they I have one of theirs, and it's one of my favorite belt knives of all time. Short philosophy on knives, on kit. You will probably see this pop up somewhere else in social media. But if it goes on your plate, it should be thin and pokey. If it goes on your belt, it should be a little bit more utility focused, because a belt knife is a belt knife. If I and I think of it that way. Generally, if I'm putting a knife on my belt, I want it to have some defensive capabilities, but overall, I want it to have more utility, a better prying edge, an edge that I can sharpen, that I'm expecting to have to resharpen multiple times. It's something that I'm not. Its sole purpose is not self defense. If I'm putting a knife on a plate carrier, it's pretty much just for stabbing.
Mm.
So I'm not the knife guy. I'm not the knife expert. I know gun culture likes to burn our identities into little objects, but like almost like a not a voodoo thing, but is that a? It's gonna be a what?
Like a superstitious thing.
Yeah, I was almost going with like a pop culture reference to like Harry Potter. Like
Yeah,
everyone has their like, oh, my identity's in my knife, and I'm
yeah,
like, yeah, it's hilarious, dude. I've done it too. So
yeah. Oh
you
yeah.
know, attaboy. So let's we were talking about manufacturing. We kind of closed off on manufacturing yesterday, and hopefully, there's something that we're all able to get out of it. I think, like I even look at we're going to be growing as a culture for sure. We're figuring things out. Manufacturing is a tricky one. Economics is a hard subject to just whatever. And economics is also interesting because whether or not you understand it, it affects you.
Mm-hmm.
The same way philosophy is the same way. You may be completely ignorant of what philosophy is, but it does affect you. In fact, it might. In most cases, it drives you.
Mm-hmm.
So so I wanted to pull back a little bit in the way that you have seen parallels between the skateboarding world and gun culture, as far as community building, participation, what having a tribe looks like, and if you could launch off of that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's super interesting. I remember when Instagram came out and, I was using Facebook or whatever, and everybody was like, a lot of people were like, oh, you got to get on Instagram. And I was like, why? I have Facebook. Like I didn't understand social media, or like the ability to build a community with social media. And so once I got onto social media or got onto Instagram, then I understood. I was like, okay, this is way cooler. I mean, this is like 2013, I think, around there, 2012, maybe a little bit. No, it was earlier than 2012. It had to be. Maybe it's around there. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
I thought,
So
yeah, I thought that's when like I thought that was when Instagram came around, was like 2012.
yeah, I think
I
that's.
don't remember.
I think it was around 2012. And so started following people and trying to figure out how it worked. But what I noticed was like, so outside of the military, I didn't really know any gun people, right? I did like, I saw some, my buddy had a gun shop and I would like go, I worked there for a little bit, helping him out. And I would go help him run gun stores or gun shows and stuff like that. And so I saw the people that would come in there and the people that would come to the gun shows, but they weren't necessarily people that I would like. I can have a conversation with them, but they weren't kind of people that I would call them like, hey, let's go hang out or whatever. And then I get on Instagram and I start seeing people that are like, that I, for all intents and purpose, I would want to hang out with. Like this is looks like somebody that we could hang out outside of just shooting, but we also have that in common as well. And so you start seeing this younger generation of people getting into the firearms industry and taking shooting seriously, not just like, oh, we're going to go set up some soda cans and shoot them off the fence, whatever. But like guys that are actually trying to train, trying to figure out like what's a good, how do I make my draw cycle more efficient? How do I make my reloads more efficient? What's the best way to work this type of cover with a rifle or a pistol or both if I have to transition because I ran out of ammo or whatever the case is. And these guys, what's fascinating to watch is these guys are figuring these things out and they necessarily don't have the training necessarily that other people have had, right? And even guys that were in the military, they get some weapons training, but back then it wasn't to the level that a lot of people get now, or definitely not to the level that like the cool guy units were getting, you know. And so when you start to see this stuff trickle over through social media, through YouTube, through Instagram, and all that stuff, it starts to extend like a hand out to a different generation. And I think that's where that big generational shift started from like what people call like the old fuds, you know what I mean? Like the guys are like, oh, my 1911 is the blah, 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 your Glocks are pieces of shit or whatever, to, you know, a younger generation of firearms enthusiasts that are more interested in like, okay, they look at it from the perspective, or I feel like they look at the perspective that I kind of was looking at it from, you know, a long time ago, whereas firearms are the modern day swords, right? If you go back 200 years and people are carrying swords or daggers or whatever, like you could expect that person, if they're carrying that out in public, assuming it was somewhere that they could legally do so, that they were proficient with that item, that they would, you know, dedicate themselves to mastering that craft, especially like professional swordsmen, you know, whether they were some type of guard or knights or whatever, or maybe they were mercenaries or you know, sell swords or whatever. They, you know, honed their craft through swordsmanship, and that taught them a lot of life lessons. And firearms are no different than that. It's just, you know, the mechanism is different, you know, or the tool is different, if you will. And so now you're starting to see these younger guys take firearms training serious as if it was jujitsu or martial arts or anything else. And so that dynamic shift, I think, made it like the people that were brave enough to get on social media and start doing things and showing things, even if they didn't have this background. Because for a long time, there was this idea like if you weren't, you know, DevGru or CAG or, you know, SF or whatever, like you didn't have a voice in this community. You couldn't say anything, right? And that's not true at all, because if you go back to the 90s, go ask anybody who was in CAG back then who was teaching them how to shoot pistols. It was competitive pistol shooters. These are guys that have never been in combat. They've never been in, you know, gunfights, but there's very few people in the world that can run a pistol better than them. And they were taking the skill sets that they developed and learned in competitive shooting to high level military units. And
Yeah.
now you got guys that are, you know, you have guys, you know, in 2012, 2013 that are taking that information that they're figuring out through one way or another, whether it was asking questions to people at shooting competitions or just kind of watching how they do things and then trying to implement those things and step their skill sets up. And then so you're building that cultural dynamic. And it was the same thing with skateboarding, like in the 90s, right? So you have the skaters from like the 80s, and they're huge boards, single tail. A lot of them are riding vert, doing like a lot of freestyle stuff. Like being able to do a kickflip was like amazing. If you could 360 flip in the early 90s, you were like skate god. Like they were like, sign him, that guy's a fucking pro right now, like done deal, you know. And the evolution of it is no different than what happened in gun culture. Technology advances, new ideas come and form, and people are brave enough to try different things. And so you have this progression, you know, and I feel a positive direction of things where it's opened up to more people. Like you don't have to pigeonhole things to say like if you don't fit this little mold or narrative, you can't be a part of it, when that's utter and complete nonsense. You know, I know people that you look at them and like, that guy's a nerd. I know a friend. He is a he was he does other things now, but he was training to be a physicist in college, right? Brilliant man. The guy looks like a freaking nerd, like straight up what you would be a stereotype nerd. That's him, but guy rips on a skateboard, absolutely shreds, right? And so there's no like special mold that has to fit within the skateboarding community. That's like if you go to the skate park, you'll see kids dressed in all kinds of ways. 90s is a huge influence in fashion for you know, younger people today, but you'll see a huge range of style and aesthetic, and the gun community is no different, right? There's a huge range of style and aesthetic. At the end of the day, we have to understand and keep in mind like we're all pretty more or less on the same team, right? Like we like firearms, we enjoy training, we're serious about it, but just because somebody doesn't fit your idea of whatever that is, you know, that firearms enthusiast or skater or, you know, mountain bike, whatever you're into, doesn't mean that one, they're not a member of the community, or two, that their ideas, thoughts, and concerns aren't valid. You know, like this idea that you have to have some kind of prerequisite of whether it's training or service or whatever to just in the community is complete nonsense, right? We're all human beings. Some of us made the decision that took us in a different path to learn things before others or learn things a different way, but at the end of the day, like, here we are now, right? We're all individuals with a shared passion and a shared joy, and we come together and we share those experiences with each other. If that kind of thing makes sense.
It does. Was there ever a roster for who was in the skateboarding community?
No.
Was it? No, never.
No.
And it's the same thing with gun culture. There never
Right.
was like a hard line of like, come here and be counted, ye.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but
Right.
that at the same time, so I know this is going to come across as a bit controversial, but so be it. When it comes to the term gatekeeping within American gun culture, or at least Western gun culture, it is in some ways my opinion that it's an illusion. It's
It
something that people are creating to justify their lack of personal participation.
is. Hmm.
Now, let me be clear in what I'm saying. It is the case in some circles, environments, and positions where people make the fallacy of argument from an authority.
Hmm.
They commit the philosophical fallacy of saying, well, I'm a Navy SEAL, therefore I'm right.
Right.
Or, well, he's a Navy SEAL there, or he's an Army Ranger, so therefore he's right.
Hmm.
That is a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy, right? It doesn't, by even though it's a logical fallacy, it doesn't discredit the context by which that person is speaking,
Right.
right? But what ends up happening then is that there are other people who don't have that background, don't have that position of authority, who become resentful, and then they claim that they're being gatekept from the community. When in
Right.
reality, no, people just don't want to spend time with you because you're a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or there's other issues of like there's standards that need to be met, and
Mhm.
when I say standards that need to be met, I don't mean standards as in like Ranger Battalion has hard standards.
Right.
You can't run a 5 mile in less than 40 minutes. You've got 30 days to figure that out, son, or you're going to find yourself in a different unit.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's that case anymore, but so far, right? So be it. And like in any sort of quote unquote elite unit, as soon as you start lowering the standards, you destroy the morale, the esprit de corps or morale of the company, and then you might as well just try to figure it out. It's going to take a lot of hard work to build. Esprit de corps in a community is in many ways like reputation. It
Hmm.
takes years to build and minutes to destroy.
Yep.
So back to maybe the controversial position on gatekeeping is that I can definitely recognize that there are examples of and cases where people in certain communities or certain angles of the community will basically say, well, you're not a blank, so you can't be a part,
Right.
or you're not a veteran, so your opinion on this matter doesn't really matter.
Right.
I mean, okay, generally it might function in some ways as a heuristic, but it's also probably a really bad argument to make, and not only on top of that, it's dishonest because I
Well,
don't think
it's lazy too.
it's lazy. But
It's
on
very.
the other side of that coin, for the amount of gatekeeping that I've heard about, most of it, not most of it, for the amount of gatekeeping that people have talked about, like, oh, you can't be a part of gun culture unless you're a veteran. It's like, when was that
Yeah.
stated?
Yeah.
You're making it up, dude. You're
Yeah.
making it up because you're resentful that somebody else went on to do something in the military and you didn't.
Right.
Whereas that guy is not bringing that to the table. You're bringing the resentment. And if
Hmm.
you're bringing resentment to the table, that is something that you need to come to terms with,
Yeah.
because whether it's and I know that sounds like a little bit, it's going to come across as crass, especially because people know that I've got a military history.
Hmm.
But part of the challenge that I have with this one is it becomes sort of the pseudo Marxist one-sided sieve
Hmm.
of, well, veterans have to apologize for other veterans who have been gatekeeping other people, but civilians don't have, like, they're like the citizens who've never served in the military get a free pass for
Right.
being whatever, and it's like, well, it's not exactly how it works. And I think
No.
and that's why your skateboarding thing brought it up.
Mhm.
It's like there is no roster to gun culture. There are just there's just a list of people that I don't want to associate with. I don't want to.
Absolutely. And that's a whole different animal than being, like saying that they can't participate. They can participate all they want. I'm just
Mhm.
not going to participate with them.
Yep.
Right.
And so like a clear example of gatekeeping was the instructor corps of most of gun culture in 2015 was not willing to teach civilian CQB because
Right.
because guilty as charged, were more concerned about what some random lawyer was going to tell me
Hmm.
than the safety and well-being of the students.
Yeah.
And thanks to people like Orion Training Group and a number of other companies, whether it's Core Vision, Orion Training Group, Cogworks, that people have pushed past that.
Hmm.
And I'm very thankful and jealous, or not jealous, but not envious either. I'm very thankful and I admire the courage of those instructors who said what everyone else was thinking.
Yeah.
This is bullshit.
I agree 100%. There are exceptions. Like I understand, like if you're putting on like a course, you're teaching people how to shoot precision. You may not want to teach like the loophole formula. Like I totally understand that, right? That's protected information. I get it. But something that's super general knowledge, like basics of close quarter combat, whether you're teaching strong wall or, flooding a room or whatever, or opposing corners, like why not? Why not show that? Why not share
Sure.
that information? You know?
I'm actually not familiar with what the loophole formula is. I got
So basically, without giving away with the formula itself, it's basically like it's a way for a sniper to engage a target hundreds of meters away inside of a hide, but you're shooting through literally a hole that's like this big, and there's a math formula you have to do: your distance to target, the caliber you're shooting, and how far away you are from that opening. So, for example, let's say you and I are working in, we'll use Iraq, right? And we're gonna go take out some bad guy for Saddam Hussein. We can.
Is it different than just ranging your target and using the mil radian spectrum? Is
Yes,
it is different. Okay,
it
cool.
is different because so what you can do is like set up inside like a cargo van, take out the light bulbs or cut out like the light bulb area from like the tail lights and shoot through the hole where the light bulb would go in a tail light and hit a target 200-300 meters away. But there's a math formula that goes into setting up and engaging, ranging that target and setting all that stuff up. Like, so I can understand like not wanting to teach that because it's as far it was. I don't know if it still is a classified formula. I get it. You know what I mean? Like you could potentially be breaking the law doing that, but you're not breaking the law, or getting yourself in severe trouble by teaching close quarter combat.
Yeah. Well, and I think then what that looks like in an ethics argument is that in some cases you're not in some you're gonna face two walls of this argument for sure. Because
Hmm.
on the one hand, there's nothing in you can say to me that would maybe it's not that there's nothing you can say to me. The idea that one group of people can get together in a room and make something
Right.
classified and prohibit you as another human being from knowing
Hmm.
how to do it. Mind you, it takes skill and practice,
Oh,
and you have to figure out how to do it. Um, that's odd. Maybe that's even wrong. However, being an instructor, you have to weigh that out.
and so
Bec-
just to clarify, like I personally, like I I don't feel like I'm not qualified to teach precision shooting. I've helped with it before, but I'm not a sniper, never was. Irregardless of that, I absolutely think that everybody should have access to all the information. Like, I think that loophole formula should be open source. And just as an example, like, I don't want anybody to misconstrue what I'm saying and because I think you're articulating it better than I was.
it's
As an
a
instructor, you have to cover your own ass, basically.
it's an interesting balance that I haven't figured out, and I think other people have done. I'm thankful for the courage of other people. Given I
Absolutely.
think I've figured out where I belong in this circle, but whatever. Um, the because it goes like that, like the for the instructors at some point in time, CQB was what you're referring to as the loophole thing, the
Mhm.
loophole formula, where like, oh, we can't teach this to civilians because I could get in trouble, and it's like, okay, that if that's where you're at as an instructor, then that is the white hot center that gun culture should be focusing on to
Absolutely.
change the Overton window, the cultural needle on that one.
Mhm.
And so far as to say, If you live in a world where if you live in a community where, like, let's just say, any sort of home defense is considered assaulting on the enemy, right? Like, there is wisdom into saying things correctly in a court of law. There's
Mm-hmm.
wisdom. It's You can't just go in there and in a court of law and think rightness is on my side, I'm going to win. You have to go with boldness,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to go with wisdom. You can't just
Absolutely.
expect the court to be on your side. Look at that guy in New York City.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, the buses, the people are in this public transit system are being attacked to some extent by a person who has a long history of violence,
Mm-hmm.
including kidnapping a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so a dude chokes him out,
Yeah.
and for whatever reason, people's opinion about it goes too far, not too far, doesn't really recognize it. Like, you think about it too, like military guys are, if when we're used to, like, fighting with each other, we're used to fighting military aged males, generally speaking. In my time, I know that's changed now. Military aged males with some modicum of fitness,
Yeah.
so that you know that if I choke you out, you're not just gonna, like, expire
Right.
most of the time. Whereas, you go out into the civilian world and you're like, oh, I just did like a generic choke, and you're like, yeah, well, he suffered,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
but, like, that's exactly where the culture needs to change. Oh, you
Yeah.
mean somebody can be threatening people, and then and still you don't have a right to self-defense? That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly where. Oh, you mean someone can break into your house, and if you take one step forward towards them, now you're the aggressor?
Right.
That is exactly the point in our culture that needs to change.
It's
This
and
I
it's
So
nonsense. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing because I've heard you say it, I've heard other people say it. Like the biggest problem in America today, and arguably the world, is a cultural problem, right?
for
Like
sure.
that is the absolute biggest problem. We've got to the point where people don't have true adversity anymore, and I don't mean to say like disparage like people don't have hard lives, they do, but what I mean is like from a day-to-day perspective, people don't have the adversity that we had 200 years ago on just living, just to survive, right? Like
Sure.
even if you live in America, you can be on all kinds of government programs and assistance and stuff like that. You still have you have a computer in your pocket, you can hop on the public transportation, go take a bus and get your coffee and go to work or whatever, like or if you're even working, like you don't have to wake up at the asshole of the morning to go till a field because you have to grow the food that's going to get you through the next 6 months. You know what I mean? Like we don't have those kind of problems or adversity anymore. So we need to solve problems. Like humans are driven to be problem solvers to some degree or another, some far more advanced problems than others are, but we don't have that kind of adversity anymore. So people look for things to solve that don't need solving or make up problems that don't exist or don't make any sense. And
Yeah.
that's people,
You
and
can,
then corrupt people that take advantage of that and use it as a form of division to push their agenda. Like it's just this whole nonsensical thing, where it could easily be solved if we just took the time to understand each other and build a positive culture going forward.
so one thing I think is one thing on that is, this is not the first time this has happened. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
this is the first time that it's happened at this scale, but remember, there was this thing called Rome.
Yes.
There was this is not the first time we've lived in a culture of opulence. And that's okay. Like, I don't mean that to be foreboding, or or anything else, like, but this isn't the first time that the Greeks dealt with it, the
Mm-hmm.
Romans have dealt with it, the Europeans have dealt with it, the various cultures have dealt with this issue of, like, you can essentially, let's just use some brutal language. You can fail at everything your entire life and never really pay the consequences of it,
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
way that people would in a more violent time pay
Mm-hmm.
for those consequences. You can live on government support your entire life and never really, whatever it is you want to call it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can do all these issues. You can never contribute to your culture. You can be a general leech on society your entire life and
Mm-hmm.
never really pay the consequences in the way that in other historical examples, whether in reality or in fiction, would argue. And so that is a big deal. Like the social safety net is so strong.
Hmm.
You the idea of well let me put it. This is going to sound brutal, but the social safety net is so strong that the only way out of it for some people is suicide.
Oh yeah,
And part of that social safety net isn't just something that catches you from fallings, but you get entrapped into it.
yeah, yeah.
It can be a snare as well, where you don't really see a way out of it, and
A good
then
example is people that are in contract and they don't want to be out of it, right? Like they do this, they don't want to do this, but I mean, some if you're like 2005, if you were a paramedic, like qualified paramedic contractor, and you had some military experience, like in as in combat, you could no shit be making $1,000 to $1,200 a day, a
yeah,
day.
a
I mean,
day.
that was not uncommon at all. I mean, guys were making money hand over fist. And the first year or two they're into this and they come back, maybe they're home for a month or so, they're spending money buying houses, cars, whatever. And now they're like, shit, I gotta pay for this stuff still. So
Yep.
they go back to it. And now they're stuck. Yeah, they're making tons of money. They're like financially, they're great, but they have no time. They have no personal time. They have no family time. They have like their time is just gone, you know? And so they feel like they're trapped in this vicious loop cycle, just like if somebody that's perpetually on government assistance, they want to get off, but if they do, then they'll lose that, and then they can't. They're whatever they're doing is not. They're either not willing to suffer a little bit to get through that that portion of it, or um, they just generally can't for whatever reason, whether it's a physical limitation, experience limitation, or whatever the case is. It's just this vicious loop cycle that traps you.
Yeah, the other honest answer is sometimes well, what do you do when you have an inverted society where the amount of money you make on government assistance is equivalent to a job that you can get?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like let's just take a really clear example. Here's another that I know people within myself has experienced this, but gun culture as well. Is like you take a military veteran who's got 7, 8 deployments under his belt. He's been around for a while, but he's still in his 20s, and he gets out of the military and he's looking for a job in society, and it's hard for you to find one. Maybe you have a degree, whatever. It's hard, it's not easy, none of it's easy, and you're looking at like paychecks and stuff like that. And even in the case of my life, like I went from living with my parents to living in the military, so like I paying for housing wasn't really a thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know um now, I'm not saying that we got paid hand over fist in the military, even in Ranger Battalion, but you still had a lot of things taken care of.
Oh yeah.
And so whether at the end of the day you're not starving, right?
Yep.
Um, uh, but there were people who were living on food stamps. Or, I know. Actually, that's happened more lately, but never mind. So you get out, you're on government assistance, and or you're not on government assistance. You get out of the military, you go to the workforce, and somebody offers you a job with 7 years of experience, effectively a PhD in a subject, and they're like, oh yeah, we can give you $12 an hour.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, dude, I'd rather just take unemployment.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and
Because
it makes logically it makes sense. Like, why would I go bust my ass for this when I can
yeah.
make this doing that and do whatever I want?
Or use that time to try, in theory, use that time to try to build something else. Like I
One-
get it, right? It's not easy because how many veterans are disabled and
Yeah,
take
a
and
lot.
accept disability? I'm one of them, right?
Me too.
And it's like there's all these things going on into this economic problem, and I agree with the issue of like the social safety net is hard to get out of in
Mhm.
some ways because how is the cost of labor kept up with people's
Yeah,
wages, and how is this kind of stuff changed, and whether it's oh well feminism doubled the workforce by putting women in, or I don't there's a million arguments that you can present to it, right? You could and I think anyone with a modicum of integrity will recognize that there's no one single issue and therefore there's no one single solution,
sure. Oh, 100%.
but there are still things that we can do. And when you were bringing this up and circling it back into gun culture itself, is you were talking a little bit about how you know we can work together, we can figure things out together. um I wholeheartedly agree with you, and now I think what we're at as far as gun culture is the leaders in gun culture, whether or not they hold positions of authority culturally or in businesses right now, are the people who are looking for ways to make those things happen.
Yeah.
You've got, if you want to get even, not even you don't, not Marxist, but if you want to get even goofy about it, there are kind of three people within gun culture. There are people who are talking, people who are planning, and people who are acting.
Yep.
And the planning people are, maybe you could say, the people who are planning are also thinking, and they're trying to figure out a way to participate and
Hmm.
add. But some people are talking in a way where their only participation in gun culture is consumption.
Hmm.
And it's a hard thing, that's a harsh thing to say, and I recognize it's a harsh thing to say. Some people, and I think, to even not be merciful, but to be clear on this one, I think people end up in that pool of, you're not really contributing at all, and you're there for a period of time, and then you work your way out of it, you find your
Yeah.
way out of it. Like, it's a place where it's kind of like being in a low mood. Like,
Hmm.
okay, you're going to be there for, hey buddy, you need to get out of that, you need to go help, go do something.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most mercifully I can say it.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that, so some people, we might be in a position where we want to be talking about building community or moving forward as a culture. And then some people are trying to figure out how to do that. Not everyone can be that person,
Hmm.
absolutely. And then some people are building right now, and it's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
Um, and I admire that. I admire the people who are trying to figure out how to integrate better with their culture and their society,
Yeah.
as opposed to isolate themselves.
And I think and tribalism is a big part of it too. People, by nature, were social creatures, more or less, on like a large scale average. And when somebody comes in to a community like the gun community, and there's this preconceived notion of what that community is, and they don't understand that it doesn't have to be like, in totality it might be this huge thing, but it's also like any other culture, there's concentric rings within it, right? And not necessarily to this point of like the smaller internal rings are more important, but maybe they're a smaller subset of the subculture of gun community, right? So, for example, without getting like too crazy, you have competitive shooters. They're a subset of gun culture, but within that, there's PRS, USPSA, IPSC, IDPA, like all these other three gun. You know what I mean? Like there's all these other things that belong into it, and the people that gravitate towards each of those, they build that smaller community within a much larger community. And people have to understand that that is okay. Like there's not this tailor-made one size fits all thing. Like people are individuals. We have a lot of commonalities and share a lot of experiences and ideas and things, but we're also individuals with our own ideas and thoughts and experiences, and things are subjective to every individual differently. The way you process and deal with things is different than the way somebody else does it, and that is an okay thing to do, right? So people have to understand that you have this big community, and then there's also smaller communities within that community, right? It's like subcultures within subcultures, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there are circles within circles within circles, for sure. Some of them are private and some of them are public.
Absolutely.
And that's a gut check to try to figure it out.
Hmm.
But there's no way around it. There's no way you can get away from it.
No, it exists everywhere.
Tribalism, community, and culture, like dignity culture, all exist with intention of each other. They're all
100.
in tension with each other.
Yep.
Because think of it this way, like, you have that old classic quote, and gosh, I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was, I'm frustrated that I can't remember who said it, because it might have been Thoreau, it might have been somebody else. It might have been Hunter S. Thompson. But
Oh,
it's it but and but you'll get it. It's like, I wouldn't join any club that would have me.
yeah, I think that was Hunter S. Thompson.
I think that is Hunter. I have not read Hunter S. Thompson. I want to pick up some of his books. It's really
Well,
foolish of me that I haven't, but it's not foolish. It's just silly that I haven't. But we'll remedy that in the near future. So Hunter S. Thompson, yeah, I wouldn't join any club that would have me. And so I think when it comes to tribalism, if there's no cost to entry, then
hmm,
there's no value to membership.
absolutely.
And how, on the grander scale, the thing that tribalism having a tribe brings is it brings a sense of community and participation,
Hmm.
but it comes with the danger of violence.
Yes.
There is an in-group versus out-group preference.
Yep.
That is inherently ripe for corruption.
Yeah.
How close are you to the inner circle? Are you the inner circle? Is it an
Mhm.
oligarchy? Look at the American government.
Oh yeah.
You know, and the idea, hopefully, I think in some sense the idea of the early American philosophy when it came to government was to make it robust against a tribal center, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just idealism, right? So we're
Yeah.
trying to get better about it. But tribalism is in perpetual contest with dignity. We're
Hmm.
like, oh, everyone's welcome. Like, no, no, no,
Mm,
no, no,
no.
no, no, we're
Yeah.
not. But and so we struggle with those two things because if you want to have community, you're going to have some cost to entry.
Absolutely.
If you're gonna have some cost to entry, you're gonna have people who don't want to pay it,
Yeah.
and
And
then
you.
they're gonna
Sorry, I didn't mean
go.
to cut you off. I was
So
gonna say
then,
you have has to be stakes. Like there has to be something of value that you're bringing to the table, or you're willing to sacrifice to participate in this thing. Like it has to be. Otherwise, you're not going to take ownership of it. You're not going to deal with it. If there's no cost to you as a participant in that community, then what value do you bring to this community? Right? You cannot, like you said earlier, you can't just be a consumer. You can't just consume and bring no value because then, I mean, unless you're like financing it, then okay, that's you're bringing some form of value to it at that point. But if you're not bringing anything to it, you're not getting out of it what you could, and ultimately, it's not going to mean as much to you as it potentially could.
yeah. Again, I'll go back to the tension of it
Mm-hmm.
because there's this conversation that has come up more recently within gun culture itself, and it is sort of the idea of like who's allowed inside the group, whatever the group is, gun culture at all, right? Like,
Right.
do we allow communists? Do we allow the LGBTQ people, or whatever that is, right? Depending on who you're hearing speak about it, they might reference or allude to different sort of like socio political terms. Let's just
Right.
use right. And so like depending on who where it's being spoken of, and generally speaking, as we've talked about this in the past, the idea of the Second Amendment really does apply to all people. Even like even like Lucas from T-Rex Arms has talked about this.
Yeah.
Is that like as far as the Second Amendment goes, all people should have it, but I don't want the government and I don't want the government regulating who can and cannot have it, but I'm not going to actively support people who want to see me destroyed by their ideology.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that then again ties to like the inherently tribal nature of some elements within gun culture where there are some people are able to transcend communities and some people are not, and some people are very very affixed into one microculture, and that's good for them, right? And so there is but at the same time we're basically saying the dignity right culture, dignity, and the concept of dignity and rights is over here,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea of belonging and being part of like a brotherhood is over
Mm-hmm.
there.
Right.
And those two, they interact, but where they interact they can create sparks.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
mhm.
Yeah. Because I mean, and one idea of it too is that everybody should have, um, everybody should exercise their Second Amendment rights. Period. Right. However, that doesn't mean you have to exercise them with me. Right. It doesn't mean we have to do this together. I think that's one of the things that people have to get around because I've seen people, especially recently on social media, like, why would I don't support the Second Amendment for this specific group or that specific group. Like, no, like something like the Second Amendment, it either is or it isn't. Like, it's a binary thing. Like, you support it, period, or you don't. Now, you don't have to associate or encourage or train or help or whatever people that want to see you destroyed for sure, 100%. But it doesn't diminish like their rights, until they violate somebody else's to participate with the Second Amendment kind of thing.
This is where I think the language of how we talk about it has been corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been corrupted, and some of it intentionally and some of it unintentionally. You do not support the Second Amendment. You either believe in it. My video will come back in a second. It's just, technology wants to be crooked today.
Yeah.
But who knows? It might actually just continue to record on my side, and then whatever. Technology is weird. Let me be very clear in this one. The Second Amendment is not something that you support or you don't support.
Right.
It's a reality that you either believe in or don't believe in.
Right.
Okay, so if I believe in it, if I believe in the Second Amendment,
Hmm.
I believe it's a reality. Like
Yeah.
this idea of the right to self-defense is a reality. I may
Yes.
not like it, I may not appreciate it, but it is there. Now,
100.
generally speaking, us in gun culture do find we take emotional and personal value in it. We apply some sort of moral weight as well as some individual significance to it. But this idea that a person has the right to bear arms is not something that we describe as being something that you have because it's supported or not supported by your opinion,
Hmm.
the political milieu, the majority or whatever. And
Right.
so like when I say this thing, um the fact that let's just use an example like I'm a Christian, right? This is not a surprise. I've been on the show before, but I'm a Christian. Now, if I live in the country of the United States and there's a person who is, and it takes you 0.01 seconds on Twitter to find somebody who thinks that Christians should be executed.
Right.
It takes zero time, right? And whatever, or on the internet, or whatever you want to do. It's not hard to find, right? There are people who hold an animosity towards Christians. What I recognize is that it is an absolute reality that that person has access to firearms
Mhm.
and that person has the right to be in possession of those said firearms.
Yep.
Okay, it's a reality. Like I can say I don't like it.
Sure.
I could say that that person, by espousing views that are referred to as hate speech or hateful positions, I wouldn't want him to have a firearm, but
Right.
that is not my jurisdiction. Not
Right.
only is it not my jurisdiction within the legal system of the United States government, but as a human being,
Hmm.
it doesn't work that way. I don't
No.
want him to have one, but it's the
Right.
reality.
Absolutely.
And if the person, this fictional individual, is willing to put his money where his mouth is, and some of them are, when
Mhm.
and the evidence is Nashville,
Yeah.
with the Audrey Hale or whatever, the I think it was Audrey Hale, who
Yeah.
shot up the school in Nashville, um, the Christian school in Nashville. Um, it's a reality that we live in. It is. You're not going to escape it. You can try to create barriers that make it less likely to affect you. You can move out of those neighborhoods, but the world is getting small.
Hmm.
But that also means that I am not going to go out of my way to make sure that person feels welcome in my world.
Absolutely.
hmm
Yeah.
I
I
don't.
mean,
I'm not obligated to do that.
yeah. I mean, prime example, like, if you ride motorcycles, let's say you ride like Harley, something like that,
hmm
just because you're like, if you look at my bike, people would like, you could be, that bike looks like it could belong to a club. It doesn't. I don't associate with any of those guys. Not, I have nothing against them. They do their thing. I do my thing, but it's two different animals. Like, I'm not interested in that lifestyle. I don't support it. It is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean I don't support, like, them to be able to do what they do, but it's just not for me. You know what I mean? So I choose not to participate in that kind of thing. It's no different. It's a personal preference. It's a personal choice. It's a personal, ideal. And it's part of, more or less, your personal moral perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's the freedom of association.
Absolutely.
Right, like and that's the other thing too, is freedom of association is built on two principles, and one of them is the right of the individual to some form of self-determination, and then it
Mhm.
is it is also matched with there is no value to false converts.
Right.
So like, if imagine if the idea of the motorcycle gang was able to centralize coalesce, metastasize into some form of a religion,
Right.
and we call it Mad Max, right? You know,
Yes.
the whole engine thingy. It's pretty
Yes.
cool. But and that becomes like the functional hierarchical religion of the United States.
Hmm.
The cult of the machine god or whatever. Ergo Warhammer 40K.
Right.
Um, if if a person is simply, if we believe in this religion as being true, and there has to be something true about it, and only true belief matters, then false converts don't accomplish anything.
Right.
And so I know I used a bunch of fictional examples to make a point, but this all of this stems out of the Inquisition in the 1700s,
Hmm.
where where individuals would occasionally use torture. Occasionally is probably not the right words. Individuals would use torture to get false confessions out of people,
Hmm.
and within over time, a combination of moral philosophy and social political philosophy came to understand that that was not only was it not effective, but it didn't produce anything.
Right.
Like, it's not like a person who's forced to be a thing isn't a thing.
Hmm.
So if you were forced into a motorcycle gang because the country forced everybody into a motorcycle gang, you're not a biker, you're just a citizen.
Yeah.
So there go identity issues. So
Yeah. And I think that's another problem is too many people wrap up their identity of who they are as an individual into, um, you know, whatever, whether, what they did in high school, if what their job is, their hobbies or whatever. And that's part of who they are as a person, but that is not who they are as an individual at the core. You know what I mean? It's part of something they do in life and it's brought them to where they are now. But that's not like if you take that away, you're not taking away their humanity. You're not taking away their personality. You're not taking away their individualism. You're just taking away that specific action, hobby, or whatever that it was they were participating in before, or if it's something like, I know it's a huge problem with veterans, they wrap up their identity post military service into what they did in the service. It's cool. That's part of your story and who you were, but you don't do that anymore. That's not who you are. You have literally your entire life ahead of you. So now you have to figure out who you are. And if you don't know who you are, figure out who you want to be and then develop yourself into that person.
many people are familiar with Pascal's wager without recognizing the name. And
Mm-hmm.
Pascal's wager is this idea that Pascal's wager came out of, oh, I can't remember what time frame he was alive. It was after Descartes but before Kant. And Pascal's wager was this idea. You had this man who, how it happened, the story of him is that he was riding his horse in a rainstorm and it fell down or something like that. He had some sort of essentially a pre-car accident, and thought he was going to die. He thought he was going to die. He was in this horrible storm, and he thought he was going to die. And so before that, and then so after this experience, he ends up surviving, and he sort of becomes this priest philosopher of sorts. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but let's just use it as an example. So he has this traumatic event, and then from that event, he has a change of heart. But what we got from Pascal in the history of philosophy is Pascal's wager, which has been brought up at least once on the show before. But it's this idea that it is it is better to be a Christian and for it not to be true than to not be a Christian and it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his wager. In the reason why I bring this up is actually not an argument for religiosity or for Christianity. It actually comes back from that is what was referred. That is the idea back in that time of what you'd call an identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Another example of an identity crisis would be Rene Descartes, which is where we get "I think, therefore I am," cognito ergo sum, which was the original inspiration for, well, in many ways, the original inspiration for the idea of the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a we're not going to get into the one-to-one like arguments on who it is, but the Matrix and Pascal's wager are effectively the same concept.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that you're in the Matrix if you're in the Matrix, kind of thing,
Right.
right? Or Elon Musk's argument idea that is, if it is possible in the future that we could create a what's the word that you call it, not a hallucination, not a psychedelic, not a blah blah blah, a an artificial reality that was so convincing that we wouldn't know that we were in it. then we could effectively make the argument that we're a simulation.
Right.
If it's possible for mankind to make a simulation that is so effective that we are unable to distinguish it from reality, then we can reasonably claim that we live in that right now.
Mm-hmm.
um Point with these things being is that in the 21st century, what we refer to as an identity crisis and what we place our identity on is very different than what we did 100 years ago, and
Oh yeah.
very different than we did 200 years ago and 300 years ago. And many of the reasons why that came from was they came from the early 1900s and this idea of postmodernism, where you get to kind of willy-nilly choose whatever your identity is.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're paying the price for it. You have no foundation, there's no belief, none of it matters.
Right.
And I think our culture, I think especially a strong element of gun culture, has just flat out rejected that.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course. Like, don't we make the joke like, don't make multicam black your identity.
Right.
Oh, like, don't challenge me, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Exactly.
I don't need to blend in. I'm too cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But
at the end of the day, it's going to be a personal perspective, personal choice kind of thing, and but I feel like more people would have a more fulfilling life if they explored potentials of who they are as a person and their role in life and society. Not just like in a cultural America, but just in the grand scheme of things on a personal level.
yeah, your identity in the cosmos.
Yeah.
It's not just whatever you want. Your identity, the world is not dependent on your perspective.
No, not at all.
You
It
know,
doesn't even give a shit.
not at all. Yeah, exactly. It will chew you
No.
up and spit you out.
Yep.
So yeah. Well, I mean, that's been I know I kind of did a bit of that one, a little bit. I kind of rambled through a little bit of that conversation, but I'd like to hear a little bit from you on. We talked about kind of the similarities between skate culture, gun culture
Mhm.
connections. But yeah, I mean, what about? I want to ask one more question, but I'm wondering if we're not going to have time.
Well, we can always, do it again, or you can have like add it as like a little teaser for later on.
Well, let's
Pull it big and put it after the credits.
yeah. It's like a Marvel reveal. Oh lord. Let's wrap it up.
Okay.
Let's wrap it up, because I think for me to pull the idea out, I'm going to have to stretch the idea too far, and it might snap like a rubber band and cause some
Okay.
chaos. So but is there anything that you wanted to give out, if you were to give advice to your younger self,
Mm.
or if you were to, if talking about like being able, the idea of forgiveness or a principle, something that has stood out in your life as far as like where you found meaning and you wish you could pass that on to somebody, where would you go?
I would two things I would really really stress to my younger self would be one, you're not responsible for other people's emotions, um, and just like they're not responsible for yours, right? So just a simple way to elaborate on that is if somebody says something to me that would be considered offensive in a general sense setting, it's still up to me how I let that affect me, right? If I get mad and just I'm ready to throw blows because they said, your mom's a whore or whatever, that's first of all, it's a stupid reason to fight. And second of all, I'm giving them control over myself because I'm allowing what their actions to manipulate my emotional state. So understanding that you're not responsible for other people's emotions, just like they're not responsible for yours. So that's one. Two, do not be fear driven. Whether you're pushed to do something because of fear or you're hold yourself back because of fear, do not be fear driven. Those are the two biggest things that I would stress to myself. It took me a long time as an adult to kind of figure out, um, that I would, if I could go back to like to teenage me and be like, hey, dickhead, listen up. These are two things I want you to think about and understand. Those would be it. Don't be fear driven and understand that you're not responsible for others' emotions, just like they're not responsible for yours.
I had a recent experience that made that first one relevant, because I appreciate it. I'm not going to elaborate. We can talk about it another time.
Mm-hmm.
But um, thank you very much for that. Thank you very
Thank
much for that advice. I think it's it's especially the fear part too. Like, have courage, man. We live in a time where courage is necessary. We might have all the information at our fingertips. gun culture has been in a place for a long time where we have all the physical equipment, but we have
Mhm.
been lacking some of the intellectual stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe
Time.
maybe we have a lot of the how, but we've missed out on some of the why.
Hmm.
And on top of that, when even if we acquire the why, we still need to pursue courage.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much. I don't want to. I really appreciate that. Where can people find you? Where do they follow your stuff? Where do they find where's new things coming out? Where do you go?
So, best place to find us right now: social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. We're on all the big platforms. Not on Snapchat, just because I'll be honest with you, I don't really understand Snapchat, so I don't use it. But all skill no luck on Instagram, one word. Raid Skateboard, no S at the end of it, on Instagram and all the other social medias. You can hit our website, raidsb.com for the skateboards, allskillnoluck.com for the clothing and gear. It is, if you want to stay up to date on what we're doing and new stuff coming out, the best way to do it is join the mailing lists for either one. I make it a habit and a priority to inform the mailing lists on new product releases or events or whatever we're doing well in advance before I put it out on social media, because I feel like if they're going to take the time and trust me with their email address, then I want to give them something in return, not just flood them with bullshit and nonsense. I mean, you'll go weeks and you'll not see anything from us until we're ready to do something or share something or release something. Then we'll let you know first and give you adequate time to plan and decide if this is something you want before we share it with social media. So that's kind of how we operate there. But so yeah, ratesb.com, allskillnoluck.com. You can hit us on the contact forms if you want to message us, or DMs, or just go directly to email. For Rate SB, it is info@ratesb.com. And for All Skill No Luck, it's general at allskillnoluck.com.
Awesome. I have things that I want to plug, but I'm not going to. You get the show today, so I'm not tagging on to that. But for that being the case, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast for part 2 with Chuck Robeson of both of those companies, All Skill No Luck and Raid Skateboard. So give them a follow. If you want to make comments below, we really appreciate it. It does serve the algorithm gods. As I think that's I believe that's a admin results quote, but whatever.
Probably
We
right.
do appreciate the time. If you can share the show with your friends, share the show around. We're growing. We're really happy to be here, and we're thankful to host the conversations, the meaningful conversations that are going on within gun culture and beyond in the United States. So, that being the case, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast, and we'll talk to you soon. Keep your hatchet sharp and your powder dry.